Hi, everyone. Hello. Good afternoon on a soggy, what is going on here? Soggy afternoon in San Diego. I'm Barry Edelstein, Erna Finzi Viterbi, Artistic Director of the Old Globe, and I'm so happy to see everybody. Oh my God, we're all together again, and it's absolutely spectacular. Welcome to our Vicki and Carl Zeiger Insight Seminar Series, and often these are done by one of the associate artistic directors or other artistic staffers at the Old Globe, but every once in a while I pull executive privilege and decide, no, I'm going to do one, and I really wanted to do one today because our guest is the director Carl Cofield, who's here directing the world premiere of Kemp Power's play The 19th in the Old Globe, and he's an old friend of mine and somebody I really am deeply honored to have not only in my own life, but in the life of the Old Globe. So I said, I'm going to talk to Carl. So let me introduce him and bring him up here and let you discover for yourselves why I admire him so much. Carl Cofield is the chair of the graduate acting program at New York University, one of the very finest actor training conservatories in the United States. And he has served as the associate artistic director of the esteemed Classical Theater of Harlem since 2018. There, he has directed many shows, mostly classics, including The Bacchae, Antigone, Macbeth, the Scottish play, The Tempest, Dutchman, and a very acclaimed recent production of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. He also directed the world premiere of Kemp Power's acclaimed play One Night in Miami for Rogue Machine Theater in LA, and then later productions of that play at Miami New Drama and the Denver Center in Colorado. He has directed at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the McCarter Theater, and the Yale Repertory Company, and he has taught at the Yale School of Drama, the Columbia School of the Arts, the Manhattan School of Music, and the New School. He received his MFA in directing from Columbia University, and I'm thrilled to welcome Carl Cofield. Ready? Have a seat. All right. Carl, welcome. Welcome to the Zeiger Insight Seminars. How's San Diego treating you?
From the rehearsal hall to the theater to my place and the Starbucks, it's wonderful. I have not had a chance to take advantage of your beautiful city. We've been hard at work, but the reception we've had in the theater and outside in the community has been spectacular. And so I'm grateful to Barry and everybody here at the Globe for just the positive resonance that your theater has throughout the country and right here in your backyard. So when I tell people I'm working at the Old Globe, it's always met with a gasp and a look and a, really? Did you know I was so-and-so? So it's been pretty amazing.
That's great. I'm so glad. And I do apologize about the weather. You know, you've been here long enough to know that this is not really the vibe, right? So yeah. I'm sorry about that. But you know, it's going to clear up later this week. So how's the work going? So you've had 4 previews now, is that right?
Yeah, it's been pretty remarkable. Let me just give you a little context. So I've had the privilege in my career of reading about 3 plays where I didn't have to go past the 3rd page before I said, sign me up. The first play was Kemp Power's One Night in Miami. For those who don't know, it deals with Cassius Clay becoming the heavyweight championship, celebrating with his 3 best friends, Jim Brown, Sam Cooke, and Malcolm X. I read the first 3 pages and said, sign me up. I'm from Miami. My oldest son's name is Cassius. So I said, if the stars don't align and if I can't direct this, I can't direct traffic. So the other play was Ruined by Lynn Nottage.
Sure.
When I first got a chance to be a part of that company, I said, I don't have to go any further. The 3rd play was this. When Barry called, and I'm tremendously grateful for Barry for putting us back together. Kemp is a longtime collaborator, but the courage to produce this material now is what excites me most about theater. Why do I say that? As I alluded to, I'm a native Floridian. And for those who are following the news, there's a constant sort of conversation about erasing history and saying we can't talk about this and we can't talk about that. And to produce this type of work, which at its root, I hope stimulates conversation and stimulates curiosity to find out more about these amazing people, right? The amazing times you know, and I want to give a shout out to Mr. Duffy, Tony Duffy right here, the photographer that was able to capture some of these images that we can go back and reference, right? It's a truly, truly special time to be doing this type of work. And as an artist, that's the work that excites me the most, to really foster conversations and hope move audiences in profound ways. So it's been pretty spectacular.
Audiences have been responding spectacularly to the show, and we should talk about, you know, why that's noteworthy in a minute. Before we do that, so can you just give us the sort of quick summary of what the show is? So the show's called The 19th. It's a world premiere by Kemp Powers. We'll talk about him in a minute. But what's the play? What's the play about?
So for a lot of us, we'll be familiar with the iconic photo of the three men standing on the dais raising their fist in protest in 1968 at the 19th Olympiad in Mexico City. I'll just speak from the eye. I knew the picture, but I didn't know the underneath. What happened to these three brave people before we got there? I'm gonna be honest with you, I thought it was a picture of two men. I thought it was Tommy Smith and John Carlos, the two African-American gentlemen on the podium. What I didn't realize, and what is equally fascinating, is the story of Peter Norman, the Australian, and the courage he showed by standing in solidarity by wearing a button. So when we see the photo, we see the men raising their fists. We see what appeared to me at the time was an unknown white gentleman just looking at the flags. What this play does expertly is gives us the context of the before, the after, and the during. So we get a classic structure of beginning, middle, and end of this tremendous story and the hardships and the just remarkable lives that these men led. And let us be clear, the profound courage it takes to knowingly walk into a lion's den. To knowingly do that, to risk not only your potential earnings, your potential's family safety, but how history will remember you. I think what Kemp does, he gives us the unvarnished reality of what these men sacrificed and went through, and that makes compelling drama for me.
And it is incredibly powerful. And you're right. I mean, I was very young at the time, but of course I've seen the photo, and that is such an iconic photo of the civil rights movement, of just protest and the nature of political protest in our country. It's also really interesting just to think about 1968, right? We're living through this moment that feels like the world is going to come to an end. But 1968 was like a really intense time, political assassination and cities on fire and the Democratic National Convention in Chicago and violence on the street and a real sense that the whole, the war in Vietnam, I mean, you know, the whole sense that the country as we knew it up until that point was at some kind of real inflection point where it wasn't really clear what was going to happen next. I mean, I'm talking to a lot of folks who lived through that period and remember so vividly what it was really like here. But that's very much in the production, right? I mean, your production specifically, but also Kemp's play, does a tremendous job of placing us in the context of 1968, right?
Absolutely. So it was important to our designers to really encapsulate what was going on in the world and to give us proper context, right? To Barry's point, I mean, the world literally seemed like it was coming apart at the seams, and we were at a real serious crossroads. And what I think Kemp has his finger on so astutely is saying that, A, who are we, where are we going, and who
Carl,
do we want to be?
excuse me one second.
Oh.
Sorry. Yes, Kevin.
Can I fix this?
Yeah, sure.
Do I need?
Pause for 1 second.
No, I'm also happy to just hold a handheld if you want.
If that's easy,
That's
whichever
totally
you
easy.
prefer.
Let me just do
Great.
that. Let me just do that. Kevin Antonil.
Hey, give it up.
All right. How's that? Okay, so I'll just do this. Okay, very good. See, this is the technology of the old globe. No matter what issue we encounter, boom, we get it fixed. Okay, Carl, you were saying.
No, so what I was going to try and reference also, I think the easiest sort of reference is to draw a line to a 21st century moment, right? So everybody knows about the Colin Kaepernick situation, right? And taking a knee, right, which is just nonviolent, it's not really doing anything, but that narrative can be spun and weaved and then perverted, for lack of a better word. So we go back to '68, and not to say that these gentlemen were the first athletes to protest and literally use their platform as a voice. But what we definitely see is the repercussions of it. And I think Kemp, like the great playwrights of the Greeks and Shakespeare and before and August Wilson, he asked big existential questions. And one of the best questions in the play for me is, what is the right way to protest civil rights and violence against us? A way that doesn't offend anyone at any time? And that's a really, unfortunately, we're still grappling with that. We're not holding anybody hostage. We're not saying profound words. We're not moving people to violence. A simple gesture can be construed and met with vitriol, and the narrative can just be spun out of control.
Yeah, so now Kemp's play One Night in Miami, which is spectacular, was subsequently made into a film. He was nominated for an Oscar for the adapted screenplay, as he adapted his own play for the movies. Does something really interesting, which is, we know this happened, we know this meeting, we don't know what they talked about, right? And Kemp's technique here is to do something very similar. Both guys, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, wrote memoirs, which are sort of fascinating because they contradict each other just consistently, right? Two guys, it's a very Rashomon kind of situation. Two guys telling the same story of the same event, but they could not be more different. And they have a contentious relationship that the play tells the story of that continues to this day. But we don't know what they were really talking about. We don't know what those conversations were. And what Kemp has done is imagined his way into those private conversations between those guys. And also, he has kind of, invented encounters that they've had with other famous figures. It's really not a documentary play, is it, about what happened? It's sort of an imagined recreation. And what a great imaginative artist like a playwright can do is give you a truth that's truer than what actually happened, which is the experience that I have watching this. Can you talk a little bit about, because you've directed One Night in Miami, tell us a little bit about that technique of Kemp's.
I think you've nailed it, Barry. And to be quite honest, what I love about Kemp, his style, is what we call historical fiction, right? So he gives us benchmarks and breadcrumbs that we know historically are accurate, but then his genius comes in weaving the possibility of how we might have gotten to this point, which absolutely leaves room for interpretation, right? But using the benchmarks of, we do know what happened right up to the event, we know what happened at the event, and subsequently we know what happened after the event. But Kemp puts his magical bay leaf into this rich gumbo and creates a feast that's something, it's his alchemy to make it dramatic, to make it funny, and to make it, I think, and from my humble words, a profound theatrical experience.
There's something about, a number of years ago, some of you who've longtime Globe audience members may remember we did a play called Camp David, in which the writer, Lawrence Wright, imagined what happened in the Camp David Peace Conference with President Carter and Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. Very similar kind of play. We know the history. There are memoirs about it. There are historical records about it. But we don't actually know what these guys talked about when they hung out together. So an imagination came to work that sort of lifted it into this other place. And what's interesting to me about that is Lawrence Wright is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. And Kemp was a journalist, right? Correct. He's sort of a playwright and a filmmaker later in his life. Can you tell us a little more about him?
No, absolutely. Yeah, so Kemp was trained as a journalist coming out of Howard University in Washington, D.C., so I think automatically the political landscape shaped the type of journalist he was. Two things, and I'm going to go off on a tangent a little bit. I think Kemp has a tremendous ear for dialogue and the way people talk, and more importantly, the public versus private conversations that people have that make it richly, sort of deliciously interesting to listen to. But I might have lost the thread a little bit, but his training as a journalist, I think, informed some of these historical events, right? I think he approaches it from a reverse engineered standpoint, saying like, wow, I know that picture, but there's got to be something underneath that I don't know. Yeah. So he started from the picture and worked his way back, read the autobiographies. For those who have met Kemp yet, he does, I would say, PhD level dramaturgy.
Stunning research,
Yeah.
prodigious research.
Yeah.
Prodigious.
So he is without question, he'll underplay it, but you can ask him a question and it's almost like encyclopedic knowledge of the events. So that is always reassuring, but he's not bound to it, right? So I've worked with playwrights who say, well, if that didn't happen and this, and we sometimes have a failure of creativity, which I think Kemp is equally versed in. But to the point about the journalistic angle, it's just that curiosity, that insatiable curiosity to find out and unearth some of these stories.
I also think you're absolutely right that his training as a journalist allows him to capture the way people talk. He just has an extraordinary ear. And then what's interesting about the arc of his career, and I promise I'm going to come back to you in a second, but Kemp is such a fascinating figure because then he writes this play One Night in Miami, gets a lot of notice, the movie of it happens. Then he starts writing episodes of Star Trek, right? Then he gets hired to write a Pixar movie, which is Soul, In Soul, you have like fluffy blue people who float in heaven, which couldn't be less of a journalistic construct, but it's this wild flight of imagination, as is Star Trek Discovery going through the universe. Now he's making Marvel movies. He's making 2 Spider-Verse movies, CGI movies that are about to come out. So it is this, in my experience, extremely unusual combination of a kind of rigorous journalistic academic mind and then this mind that's highly, highly imaginative. He's extraordinary, and he's been around a lot, although he's busy up with the Spider-Verse movies. Can you just talk a little bit about your collaboration? Because one thing I will say to our audience here is that when the Globe said that we wanted to do this play, Kemp knew that this was going to be a very busy time in the run-up to the Spider-Verse movies coming out. Because, when you're directing a $200 million Marvel, they kind of have a certain claim on your time, right? So Kemp said, well, one of the things that I think would really make me more comfortable is if I had Carl to direct it, because we have the shorthand and we know each other so well. So can you talk a little bit about your working relationship with Kemp?
No, that's a great setup. So I will say, back in New York, many years ago, I was on the train and a gentleman I work with closely now, the producing artistic director of the theater that I happen to be a part of, asked, hey man, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm directing this. He said, do you want to direct a reading of a play? I was like, absolutely. What's the play? Enter One Night in Miami. As I mentioned before, 3 pages. Where are we doing it? What time just tell me where to be there. And so Kemp had flown in from Los Angeles. Kemp and I are of a certain age. We're both black men of a certain age. We have a similar lexicon. We have a shorthand of the influences on our artistry. So we grew up listening to De La Soul. We grew up listening to conscious hip hop music, so Public Enemy and KRS-One. And so we can go back and talk about things outside of theater and just use those sort of cultural reference points. After the first reading of the play One Night in Miami, Kemp said, hey man, I'm a part of a theater in Los Angeles and we're gonna actually produce this. Would you be interested in coming out? A little context about me. I'm married, I have 2 beautiful boys who were quite young at the time. So I said, let me talk to the boss and see what we can do. I was finishing up a master's degree at Columbia University. But Barry, as you know, as an artist, as a director, there's certain projects that you can't when you close your eyes, you're still thinking about it. And this was one of them. Long story short, we were able to make it happen. I slept on Kemp's son's bunk bed. Feet hanging, I won't, bore you with the description, but my feet were hanging off the end, but it didn't matter because the work was our northern star. That was what was the most valuable thing. We got the play up and it was tremendously successful. And in this business, for those who don't know, the most sincere form of flattery in the business that we do is people want to work with you again. That's something that you can't put a price tag on. You can't really buy that. It's either you have it or you don't. So sometimes you'll see a lot of one-offs. You get a hit show with someone, and then they go off and pick the new hottest director or team or whatever. But I'm tremendously indebted to Kemp. As you mentioned his accolades, and he got busy, but he always comes back to the theater. He always comes back to the theater because he believes in it, and he knows that is something that is fundamental to my being, is the theater and the work in the theater. So we had a couple of other possibilities that didn't either pan out from his point of view or from my side, because just life and business and other projects. And when this came, and Barry and the team said, we're willing to work with your schedule, and we know Kemp's busy, and I got a couple things going on in New York, but the Globe was so committed to this project, that was another thing that just said, hey, if there's a universe where we can at least steal some time, we're gonna make it happen. And I'm grateful that we were able to find that.
Yeah, me too. And you guys have been writing. I mean, Kemp's been writing. You've been putting in new stuff, right? I mean, new pages went in Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? And more's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talk about that. So what's changing in the play?
So one of the beautiful parts about whenever you're coming to previews, a lot of people don't realize this, but this is a savvy audience. From preview to preview, there are probably 200 things that change from the night before. 200 things. Some can be as big as set pieces flying in. Some can be as small as we're taking out a word. We can change the costume. We can change. 200 things on average happen from day to day in a preview. As Barry alluded to moments ago, we're not satisfied. We want this story to be the best that it can be, and Kemp is still working. Marvel movies aside, he's still like, how does that seem? How does this feel? What do we think we need? And midnight conversations with, for those who don't know, Barry is also an incredibly rigorous dramaturg. And I think we're all in agreement that the work is the thing. And we all just want the work to be the best it can be. And so we powwow, and how did this land for you? And I still think we need a little more, seasoning here. And how do we make this better? So we've been in the lab, we've been in the workshop ever since.
And we hope and we expect that this is the first step of many in the development of this play. And so part of the role of the Old Globe is to devote resources to the development of the script so that it can go on and have a rich life beyond here. And one of the areas that you've been working on and that we've all been talking about is this relationship between these two men. Because although it tells this history of this very iconic event in American life, an event that continues, as Carl said, to resonate in this moment of continuing churn so boringly around the same set of issues that we were talking about in 1968, and we're still talking about those issues in the same frustrating way that we were talking about them in 1968, right? Sadly. But what Kemp has figured out how to do is to also make it in a funny way a kind of love story about these guys that are I don't know, their relationship is sort of like older brother, younger brother. Their relationship is sort of like childhood best friend. We see them over a long span of their lives, from way before the Olympics in 1968 till dozens of years after the Olympics in 1968. And what you come to understand is that they have become linked to each other like, Romulus and Remus, and they are condemned or liberated to go through all of American history as those two guys that are tied together by this moment. And as I've watched the work that you're doing, it seems to me that's where you and Kemp are digging the deepest, which is to say, it's not really a political play. Although it deals with those themes, it's really a play about human beings in a moment of crisis, figuring out how to do something really brave and reckon with what it means to have principles in a world that just doesn't care and doesn't want to hear it, right? And
Absolutely.
That's kind of the work that's going on, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We're still chiseling away at that, but you're absolutely right. At the core of it, I would even go so far to say, yeah, it is this star-crossed lovers, but it's also sort of this weird, bizarre love triangle between the three men.
Because of Pete.
Yeah, because Pete is, he's the, in a strange way, that other Beatle, if you will. You know what I mean? That, you know, he's on the drums trying to keep the rhythm. You know, somebody's playing fast and he's trying to hit the rhythm a little bit more. But he reverberates throughout the play in a way that I think is subtle, but also like a gut punch.
The play's extremely powerful, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, you know, it's a strong cup of coffee, this play, right? As extremely entertaining as it is and as fascinating as it is, it's a real strong cup of coffee. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about this crazy moment in the American theater where audiences haven't quite come back at full strength yet, where what's succeeding in New York anyway is like fluff, right? And that's what people, let's go see XIXth, let's go see, you know, and Juliet, let's go see Some Like It Hot. And this is a play that really rewards careful listening, that really asks us to think about the moment that we're living in and the society that we're living in. Can you just do a little inspirational moment about the necessity of drama and thoughtful, hard-hitting work at a time when the world seems to be telling us keep it light, keep it light?
Yeah, you know, without going down too much of a rabbit hole, but I will give you an insight to my philosophy. I really come from the school of thought that I believe in theater much like the Africans and the Greeks. It's a civic responsibility for us to share this together because it'll make us better citizens. So when you go to a Greek amphitheater back in the day, you're sitting next to the Roman general, you're sitting next to the general, you're sitting next to a butcher, you're sitting next to a doctor, and it's not sort of transactional. There's actually something that the spectator has to bring to it. So I believe that the drama of it, and Kemp and I talk about this all the time, to me this is actually a language play. And I use that in the sense of it's big philosophical debates happening before us. We're disagreeing or we're not seeing eye to eye about how to go about it, and Kemp drops this in beautifully. It's the philosophies of Martin and Malcolm, right? We sort of have the same goal, but we definitely have a different GPS guiding us how to get there, right? It's Google Maps and iMaps or whatever. But I think that it is vastly important to have a large offering of XIXth, but it can't just all be XIXth. The ecosystem can support more. And to the point about being a strong cup of coffee, it is. It is. But I think that is, I think this is the American theater that a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, yearn for. Yeah, bring it on.
I feel that way for sure.
We're in a time and place where people are saying, you can't say this word, I can't say that word, I can't say this word. And I actually think the theater is a place that we can have, I won't say safe conversations, but I say resilient. That it might be hard, right, to sit through it, but we're resilient. When I look at what these three brave men went through back in 1968, when things were arguably much more overt, much harder, right? And a lot of the people in this room, you remember it, because I believe some of us were there. And we got through it. And we're better for it. So I don't believe in sort of going around and pandering and watering it down. I believe, you know, the theater audience here in San Diego definitely is amped and able for this rich, unvarnished work of art.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And anyway, I start every day with a strong cup of coffee, you know? Yeah, you don't want to know me until I've had my strong cup of coffee. So I love strong cups of coffee in the theater too. Carl, with the time that we've got left, I want to switch subjects just a little bit and talk about your life as the head of one of the great actor training conservatories in the United States. Now, you know, we run a great theater training program here, the Shiley Graduate Theater Program that we run jointly with the University of San Diego. And so we do a lot of thinking about this subject of how to create the next generation of actors. Before Carl was running it, I had a very important chapter of my life where I taught and directed at NYU grad acting, which was run at the time by a truly legendary figure in the American theater, a woman named Zelda Fichandler, who was in the first generation who made what is today the regional theater movement. She founded the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., one of the great theaters in the country, and she was pretty much responsible for extending the 501c3 to theater companies, right? Because she had a board member who was in Congress on the Ways and Means Committee or something, and she was like, you got to help us out. And it was a crazy story. Anyway, a legendary figure, succeeded by a guy named Mark Wing Davey, also an incredibly impactful person. So, Carl, you're in a chair that has been occupied really by giants. And that theater program, I mean, you can rattle off, I'm sure because you do this a lot, the names of the giant American actors who were trained at NYU grad acting. I mean, Billy Crudup comes to mind, Marcia Gay Harden. I mean, if you were to subtract NYU graduate acting from the American cinema, television, and theater culture, it would be a far poorer place. This is a major institution. So can you talk a little bit about your sense of what it is to be part of the future of American acting and what you're thinking about, right? And Corey, who's in the show, is one of yours, right? Is an NYU grad acting.
No, absolutely.
Who plays Tommy Smith. So can you just give us a sense of what's going on in American acting training at the moment from your very vaunted vantage point on it?
Well, no, that's a fantastic question, Barry. I think in context is important. I had the privilege of being a child actor growing up. My uncle was Clarence Thomas, not to be confused with, but he was a contemporary of Burt Reynolds. So Burt Reynolds had a theater in Florida called the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theater back 1,000 years ago when we still wrote with quills. It was a place that the New York actors who had done TV and film would escape for the winter and come down and do some challenging theater on the stage.
Jupiter,
in
right?
Jupiter, Florida. Perfect. I was that kid who could recite everything on stage and saw firsthand the impact that theater could have. And from that 4-year-old mind, I reverse engineered it. So I started doing films. Then I went to TV. I did about 13 commercials as a kid. I was the face of Burger King.
Know that?
Yeah. And so, much to a lot of people's chagrin, the thing that moved me the most was actually live theater, because we had a direct conversation with an audience, right? That something a la a religious experience could happen nightly, and it wouldn't be the same. Although I'm watching great film performances, that person is probably on a golf course while I'm having this thing happen, unlike the theater. So fast forward a lot of years, theater has been tremendously rewarding to me. I always tell everyone, theater has given me more than I will ever give it. So looking at the people that you've mentioned who were in the chair prior to me being there, it's a little awe-inspiring in the best sense of the word. So I made a commitment about 15 years ago that if I could ever be of service to an actor who wanted to be the artist that they wanted to, and I could aid in that, that was something that I would love to be able to do, because the craft has given me so much. If I could reach back and help. Lo and behold, I did not think that it would be NYU. I thought it would be at, if I'm going to be candid, I thought it would be at a HBCU, which is a historically black college or university. I had my little vision board. It was going to be FAMU or Howard in Washington, D.C. Something, God, what is the thing? You know, men plans
and
God laughs.
Right.
Right. The opportunity arose to come to NYU. In my career, I had been with many NYU actors. I had the privilege of being part of the acting company, which was founded by John Houseman and Margot Harley. The premise of that would be to take 12 actors from elite or whatever great theater schools, put them on a bus, go all around the country and take theater to places that, unlike San Diego or Los Angeles or New York, that don't have a big regional theater or don't get exposed as much. In that time, I got to work with actors from NYU, I got to work with actors from Yale, I got to work with actors from RADA, from Juilliard. And what always stuck with me, Barry, and this just is not for the camera, was the way the NYU actor was bold, was playful, and rigorous. And that stuck with me about 20 years later. So when the opportunity arose to come to NYU, I jumped at it. I see my role there is to help 16 young actors in each cohort become the artists that they want to become. When Zelda was in charge, we were training the actor for the American repertory theater system. Unfortunately, that system doesn't exist anymore because of, just budget constraints. We can't have 20 actors, working year round. There's only 2 or 3 companies. Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I think there's some version of it still at Alabama Shakespeare Festival, and everything else has moved to an associate artist position. In my current role, my job is to forecast where I think actor training will go and what needs to happen. So I've challenged our faculty to think, what will the graduate actor need in the year 2040? What's it going to look like? And how do we reverse engineer from there? So that was the prompt I've given. So obviously, TV and film plays a huge, huge component to that. I'm just sharing with y'all. I mean, I was like, well, we have Siri and we have Google Plus. Like, do we need to create a class like acting with computers? Like, what is that? Gaming is a huge thing. So when I entered the field, you had 2 or 3 ways to work as an actor, whether it's film or television. If you got lucky, you did a commercial, a national commercial. And then later on, we got into voice, books on tape, right? As a way to earn income, right? So that is where we are currently at. NYU has a lot of resources, and we have some fantastic things coming down the pike. I'm pairing with the School of Gaming. When I came into the field, you could audition with a little green screen behind you, and you would act in front of that, and then you would go and post edits, and they would do it. The field has changed so much that if I put my friend Disco here in front of a camera, and I say, you're on Game of Thrones, the dragon can be there. And now he is acting with the dragon. So we're talking about a craft, an art form of acting that has been around and will continue to be around, but how does it evolve? And do we need to hyphenate a little bit? Do we need to make hybrids of it? Yada, yada, yada. So that's where we're at.
That's fantastic that the future of the American acting profession is in such extraordinarily capable hands. Mm-hmm. We've got a 7 p.m. curtain tonight, so I'm going to wrap up here for those of you who are going to come and see the show, and so that Carl can get backstage and get ready. This is a show of which the Globe is incredibly proud. It's a really important new American play that's talking about really important things. It's going to have a big, long life around the country and I believe beyond, and that's in large measure to the loving, caring, detailed, rigorous work done by this extraordinary artist. Please join me in thanking Carl Cofield.
Thanks, Barry. Appreciate you. Thank you.